Well, joining me now to look at some of the big stories this week in federal politics are two members of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Jordan Press is a political reporter with the Canadian Press, and Gloria Galloway is a national reporter for the Globe and Mail. Both of you, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Good to be here.
Let's start with something which the new Senate has been doing work, and it's sent one bill back to the House of Commons, C-69, the big environmental assessment legislation, back with 180 amendments, and then C-48, the tanker ban. The major gutting of that bill has been avoided, but there's still possibility there'll be some changes in the Senate to C-48, the tanker ban. We talked about it with our MPs, but things are not really clear where this is all going. I'll just open up to you, starting with you, Jordan. What do you make of it? I mean, two different pieces of legislation, two different states, but these are very important pieces of legislation for the government.
They are, and what they show for the first and foremost is how Justin Trudeau's changes to the Senate actually are playing out in practice, particularly right now at crunch time when his government is up against a deadline to get all those bills passed. And there's no mechanism for him to push these through the Senate. And not only that, but you are also facing the possibility that if the Senate decides to make these changes and stand its ground, particularly because you have some independents who are willing to do that, does that mean that this government now has to get involved in a protracted debate that goes into the summer months, getting closer and closer to Election Day, about whether they want these bills passed the way they want them or the way the Senate wants them?
Although we've said that for about 2 different years, and in the end, in some of these showdowns, in June, we have seen the Senate decide, even in its new fractious and rebellious independent state, that the precedence goes to the elected House of the elected chamber. So I don't know where we're going. We're still asking that question. Gloria.
Yeah, I think the proof will be in what actually happens by the time the Senate rises. So if, in fact, a lot of these bills get through the gate, get a royal assent by, July, then, I think that the Senate will be deemed to have done its job. If there are a lot of them left sitting on the order paper, then I think you could start to question whether or not, in the end, this independent move was right. But look, some of the bills, like let's take one bill where an independent NDP member's bill to make all legislation conform with the United Nations rights on Indigenous people. Yeah. Well, it's not the independents who are trying to hold that up. That's conservatives who are trying to hold up. So, party politics, partisan politics has, could be playing just as detrimental, just as a blocking effect on bills. And so, I'm not sure that it's the independents necessarily that you can, even if bills don't get passed, I don't think you can put it all on independents. No. I think we have to wait and see how it goes.
It's a very complex constellation right now with independents, really Liberals, and Conservatives. Jordan, though, what about C-69 is the biggest piece of legislation environmentally for this Trudeau government, and the opponents are saying it's a no more pipelines bill. The government saying this is crucial to our environmental plans. We're not getting a clear answer from the government what's going to go on.
Well, they'll have an answer sometime next week, because that's when Cabinet gets a chance to actually look at it, and then they will make a decision
about 180 amendments. Yeah.
Exactly. Do we take all of them, which is essentially what the Conservatives would like, and essentially what even some independents might like as well, or do they only take a little bit of it? And that is where I think where you're going to start seeing that divide between maybe the new Senate and the old Senate. The old Senate, under the old system, they acknowledged even the opposition, when the Liberals were in opposition to the Senate, acknowledged, listen, if we don't like a piece of legislation, if we make all these recommendations and the government rejects it, we will hold our nose and pass it, because that is essentially, that's our job. But this is the new Senate, where you may have some independents going into an election where they want to make the Senate a bit of an election issue, and to make the changes that Justin Trudeau brought in, the Liberals brought in, more permanent. They may want to exert their force a little more, maybe make the government sweat a little more about making decisions about which ones they want to, which of these amendments they want to take.
And make the journalists sweat as well. Okay, I have to move on to another subject, because I know it's one that you want to talk about, Gloria. And that is, so much of our attention we were riveted on Monday morning when we saw the release of the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report. Huge, huge report. 231 calls to action, but also that famous phrase where the commissioners said that this was genocide, and a continuing genocide. My question is, here we are at the week's end, we're still talking about the report, we're still talking about the term genocide. Has there been a pushback? Has there been a derailing of the main thrust of the report because of those terms?
There certainly has been a pushback by columnists and an editorial in my paper. So certainly there's been a pushback. But I spoke to Marion Buller, the Chief Commissioner, in the days after the report was released, and I said, are you concerned that people are thinking about the word genocide, not about your 231 recommendations? And she said, no, the fact that people are talking about the word genocide means that people are thinking about the report, and maybe people will think that there's more urgency to start acting on those 231 recommendations.
Where do you see it going in the next week, in the weeks to come? We're up, we're right up to a federal election now.
Well, I suppose I was more optimistic that any of this process was going to have some kind of long-term effect. I'm not going to predict that this report or any report could be turning the tide on what is a national tragedy. I mean, the disproportionate number of missing and murdered Indigenous women is really a Canadian shame. And I don't see this report changing things, but at least hopefully now it's been drawn to Canada attention.
I want to get to Jordan in a minute, but I have to put something to you because you were there, and I remember interviewing some of the families who were there at the event on Monday, and I was surprised by some of them were actually, though, seeing positive in the Commission's work. They were willing to point to things that had improved. Like I was quite stunned by them saying, no, but there has been a real progress made even in the time that we've seen this Commission sitting.
You mean that they were saying that there has been positive action on the part of government? So, well, sure, but we've had a government that's been, more amenable. I think has done quite a fair bit. Has been thinking that the Indigenous file is quite important, sort of all round. So are the positive changes that have been made attributable to the work of the Commission, or is it just that we're all more cognizant of what's going on? I don't know.
Okay, Jordan, your thoughts on it?
Well, I think, if anything, maybe at least it begins a discussion. If people are talking about the term, maybe as Jane Philpott, the former Indigenous Services Minister, in her statement in the House, she said, I just encourage people to read it. Just read the report to make your own decisions about it. And maybe that gets people talking about it. Maybe then, as they're talking to those candidates who are going around on door knocking, one in my riding in my neighborhood knocked on my door last night. Maybe people are now saying to them, hey, what are you going to do about this? What are your thoughts on this? And that begins a discussion at the doorstep that if you want to see some positive change happen in an election, that's maybe the avenue for it.
Okay. I have to add a third topic because I know both of you cover Veterans Affairs. And I just spoke to Neil Ellis, unanimous Veterans Affairs Committee motion to be voted on next week, calling on the government to start funding subsidies for homeless vets. What do you make of it? Jordan, you filed on this story. What do you make of it?
Yeah, we at CPAC have been filing on this story for a while now, for a couple of years, and this seems like a no-brainer for the government. There is data, there is research that shows that you provide these veterans with the money they need, with a housing stipend, and they can get off the streets. Consider that in this country we have an estimated between 3,000 and 5,000 homeless veterans. That 5,000 number, the same number of soldiers who died in the 2 months after D-Day, just to give you a sense. In the United States, they went from about 80,000 down to 40,000 homeless veterans in 8 years during the Obama administration, simply by giving them a voucher. There is enough momentum here and enough frustration from the veterans community to say, this is an easy thing for you to do, just do it already.
But as you say, I mean, here on CPAC, we had Scott Taylor doing a documentary for us, and one of the things that figured prominently was, veterans living in garages, living on corners, the homeless vets. This is not new. Gloria, you've been following the whole thing.
So let's talk about what the real problem here is. Yes, absolutely. If you can fix it by giving veterans a voucher, to homeless veterans a voucher to get them off the streets, of course, Canadians want to do what's right for veterans. But since 2006, we have been providing veterans with disabled veterans with much less money than what we used to be giving them. So we've been improving the compensation to them in dribs and drabs and bits and pieces all along. Look, we've got a lot of homeless people in Canada, veterans and otherwise, and that's a massive problem that should be tackled. And veterans deserve to be off the streets just as much as anybody else, and maybe even more so because of their sacrifice to the country. But if we're going to start talking about improvements for veteran services, surely we have to start talking about improving that package. And the Liberal government has gone some way, the Conservative government has gone some way, but neither matches up to what we used to be paying our veterans.
Jordan, prediction, I talked to Neil Ellis, and he seems confident that if they vote this motion, the government will shift monies from the homeless strategy for this particular measure. Do you think we'll see the funding before the election?
Before the election, maybe not. I would expect this maybe to become a bit of an election issue.
Okay.
There is opportunity for them to move money around within the national housing strategy.
Yeah, that was the argument.
But right now, the only housing benefit under that strategy, it is co-funded with the provinces. They've already negotiated it. Okay. So there's a possibility maybe they direct some of that towards veterans. Mm-hmm. But as far as something dedicated to veterans through Veterans Affairs Canada, for instance, I'm not holding my breath that it's going to happen before Election Day.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to thank both of you for coming in. Always a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much.